Hello, in this video I'm going to explain why I believe the coronavirus is not going away anytime soon within the United States. So, this is a war. Our enemy is not a nation state, nor is it other infected people. It's the virus itself, too small to be seen. Coronavirus is not going away anytime soon, and it's time that we start fighting against it. There are three parts to this war, similar to World War II. There's our Manhattan Project, the War Front, and the Home Front. I'm going to go over these in order. But first, why do I believe Corona is not going away anytime soon? Well, I've been paying attention to a lot of numbers, especially for Singapore. Singapore adopted very early lockdowns. When I say lockdown, I mean social distancing as law. Stay-at-home orders are also law, but they're different and way more serious. So Singapore adopted very early lockdowns. They also had the most aggressive test and trace program in the world. That's a policy that I approve of, and it has produced the best quality data in the world just by having the most tests. They were even able to diagnose people with corona before they ever knew they had it. Or even they had already recovered and they didn't know they had had it. Singapore also has a permanent summer. So they have everything you could hope for to crush corona. Yet their case numbers and hospitalizations continued to rise. They also found that new cases are mostly not coming from travelers. They are a big international city, but they're seeing some community spread. It's coming from within their own borders. In short, serious efforts and the best weather in the world might not be enough to kill corona, depending on how you respond to it. So, one of the best end games that we have is our Manhattan Project. And I don't mean nuclear weapons. Our Manhattan Project is the vaccine. Saying a vaccine is 18 months away and letting that be the end of it is just not good enough. We need to be pouring a lot more resources into developing a vaccine quickly. And not just a vaccine, but also to do randomized controlled trials for just about any other drug that we think could be good for treating it. Because if we wait 18 months, coronavirus will already be over, and it will be over in the worst way. So let me show you on these charts here. Here I've produced a SIR model. SIR, real mathematicians use this to model pandemics. It has its limits, for sure. This one pretends that the United States is just one blob of a city that's uniformly distributed. But it's basically good, and I made sure that mine tracks with the actual data from the United States. Not this one so much, but the other one is better. So let's look at the categories of people here. We have the percentage of the population here from 0 to 100%, time in days from left to right. The blue field are the susceptible population. These people have never had corona. R means recovered. That's the gray area. They had corona and got better. I means infected. That group. This is the group that has corona on that particular day. And D is for dead. It's the black area, and you can see it's basically nothing until it gets slightly thicker and a little thicker as it keeps going. And in this model, let's take a look at the final count of dead. Okay, so in that column it's 880,000. Yes. That tiny sliver is 880,000 people. Okay, so This chart also is the do nothing chart. This is what happens if you do nothing to stop corona. This particular model got 880,000 deaths. I've also calculated one that gets 650,000. So this is what happens if you never have any social distancing. As you can see, the plague doesn't even really run out of steam until well after October in this model. And here, this is April 10th that I started modeling it, and we're 8 days later. You can see that it has not even started. So you might be wondering, how much does social distancing help? We'll get there, don't worry, but first we need to talk about the war front. The war front is the medical field of battle. It's in the hospitals, and it's fought by everyone in the medical industry, from doctors and nurses to janitors and cooks. There are janitors and cooks in the armed forces as well, so they're part of this effort. Instead of bullets, they use gloves. Instead of BDUs, they have scrubs. And instead of tanks, they have ventilators and beds. Corona has spread to such a degree that I believe we may not be able to kill it in the same way that we crushed SARS, bird flu, swine flu, and others. It's so infectious. On this main chart here, you might be able to see a thin yellow line. Well, if not, let me scroll down for you. Okay. This chart shows hospitalizations. So there's hospitalizations. I'm assuming from Singaporean numbers that 10% of people who get corona will be hospitalized. So this entire curve is only 10% of this red curve up here. I've divided this into 3 more categories. So it's time to talk about the case fatality rate, or CFR. I'm using a CFR of 0.3%. Not 3%, 0.3%. This seems to be the percentage of people who will die even with the best healthcare in the world. So again, I'm using Singaporean numbers to get that. And I think it may be lowballing even then, because I didn't factor in how time works, how long it takes for someone to die with it. However, there's still a group of people who will die if they don't receive treatment, but they will survive if they do. So in order to figure that out, I had to play around with comparing numbers from first world countries and third world countries, but I believe a reasonable number, if conservative, is 3%. So that's what this red curve is. This is 3% of all infections. And the yellow curve are people who, in a normal world, would need hospitalization, but they could maybe survive without it, especially with family providing care at home. And so this blue line is the invisible yellow one from this one up here. And this blue line represents the capacity of the American healthcare system. It's actually the number of hospital beds in the United States, but I'm using it as a general benchmark for the capacity of the US healthcare system. I understand there are a lot of different measures of capacity, such as number of medical personnel, amount of PPE, number of ventilators, etc. But number of beds is generally a quality benchmark. It's very low. So you see this you see this part of the red group that's above the blue line? They're just dead. There's not enough supplies or manpower to help them. And that's also assuming that the yellow group doesn't transition into being red and needing its own kind of life-saving support. Because after all, by definition, they do actually need hospitals. So raising this blue line should be one of our highest priorities as a nation, especially getting it above the red curve here. That involves a lot of manufacturing. So far, the Defense Production Act has not been used by the president, and I think that using the Defense Production Act to make medical supplies is the most important thing we could be doing regarding the war front. We should also be recruiting more medical personnel, and people have had that idea, and it's doing well so far. All right, so I've talked a little about the I've talked about our Manhattan Project and the war front. And I'm going to save the home front for part 2, so stick around for that one. I think you'll really like it. I'm going to include some things that you can be doing, and I'm going to talk about the effectiveness of social distancing as well. See you in the next one.